Every single human on every single continent came from one starting point in Africa. No planes, no cars, not even a horse yet. Just legs, some questionable rafts, and apparently zero fear of open ocean. Humans conquered the entire planet before we even invented the wheel, and honestly, the way we did it is unhinged. And before you picture this as one clean, single journey, like everybody just packed up and walked out of Africa one time and that was that. Nope. This happened in multiple separate waves over tens of thousands of years, using at least three completely different strategies. Some of it was walking. Some of it required crossing actual open ocean, on purpose, tens of thousands of years before anyone would call it sailing. Let's get into how this actually happened. Quick thing before we dive in. If you're new here, we cover ancient history and human origins like this every week. Real research, zero boring textbook energy. Hit follow now so you don't miss the next one. So here's the first thing that surprises people. Humans didn't just leave Africa once. Genetic and fossil evidence shows there were multiple separate migration waves out of Africa, spread across tens of thousands of years, and honestly, most of those early waves didn't even survive long term. Some groups made it out, established themselves for a while, and then just died out, leaving behind fossils and tools but no living descendants today. It's less triumphant one-time journey, and way more humans kept trying this exit multiple times before one version of it actually stuck. The version that did eventually stick appears to have left Africa sometime after about 80,000 years ago, using one of two likely routes. The first was a northern route through the Sinai Peninsula. Basically a narrow strip of land connecting Africa to the Middle East, allowing people to walk out without any water crossing at all. The second, and increasingly favored by researchers, was a southern route across a narrow strait at the bottom of the Red Sea called Bab el-Mandeb, connecting what's now Djibouti to the Arabian Peninsula. Either way, the very first leg of humanity's global takeover was surprisingly low-tech. Just walking, following the coastline, sticking close to fresh water and familiar food. Okay, so they're out of Africa. Now what? Turns out the next move was basically hug the coastline and don't stop. And it worked way faster than you'd expect. So once groups made it into Arabia, a lot of researchers now think they didn't wander randomly inland. They followed the coast. And this wasn't a random choice, it was actually a genuinely smart strategy. Coastlines gave migrating groups a reliable, familiar food source the whole way. Shellfish, fish, and other seafood, meaning they didn't have to gamble on finding new inland food sources in completely unfamiliar territory. It's basically the ancient equivalent of taking the route with guaranteed gas stations instead of risking it on the back roads. And this coastal route moved fast. Genetic evidence suggests that within just tens of thousands of years, descendants of this same migration had already reached India, then Southeast Asia. For a species walking on foot with zero mechanized transportation, covering that kind of distance in that kind of time frame is honestly wild. These groups weren't slowly wandering by accident. They were moving with real intent and direction, sticking to a strategy that consistently worked. Okay, so far this is all still walking. Impressive, but still just walking. Here's where things get genuinely insane. Because at some point this same migration hits a stretch of open ocean, with no land bridge, no shortcut, nothing, and they crossed it anyway. So by around 65,000 to 53,000 years ago, descendants of this migration had made it all the way to Southeast Asia, and the next stop was Australia. Except here's the problem. Even during the Ice Age, when sea levels were around 100 meters lower than they are today, there was still a stretch of open water roughly 70 kilometers wide separating Southeast Asia from the landmass connecting Australia and New Guinea. That's not a river crossing. That's not a narrow strait you can see across. That's genuine open ocean out of sight of land for a real stretch of the journey. And they made it anyway. Since there's no realistic way a group survives swimming that distance, researchers are confident this means these early humans built some kind of boats or rafts, making this quite possibly the earliest known evidence of intentional open-water seafaring in all of human history. Not accidental drifting, not a lucky current, an actual planned water crossing tens of thousands of years before anyone would define this as sailing or navigation. Picture standing on a beach, having zero prior generational knowledge of boat building passed down to you, and deciding, yeah, we're building something and going across that. That takes an almost unreasonable amount of confidence. So they've conquered coastlines and even open ocean. But there's still one continent left, and getting there required something completely different. Not boats this time. Ice. So the very last major migration was into the Americas, and this one relied on a completely different trick: timing. During the height of the last ice age, so much of the planet's water was locked up in massive glaciers that sea levels dropped dramatically, exposing a wide stretch of land connecting Siberia to Alaska. Scientists call this land Bridge Beringia, and it wasn't some narrow, sketchy strip either. At its widest, it was potentially hundreds of miles across, more like its own temporary landmass than a bridge. Evidence suggests groups crossed into the Americas via this route somewhere between about 30,000 and 15,000 years ago, following herds of Ice Age animals like mammoths across into completely unexplored territory. And once that ice eventually melted and sea levels rose again, Beringia disappeared back underwater, meaning this migration route had a built-in expiration date. Humans crossed into the Americas during a narrow window of opportunity that the Earth itself eventually closed behind them, cutting off easy return travel and leaving these populations to spread out and adapt across two entirely new continents on their own. So here's the actual takeaway. Humans didn't spread across the entire planet because of some single brilliant invention or one heroic journey. It happened through decades and centuries of small, opportunistic decisions: following a coastline because the food was reliable, building a raft because the current group ran out of options, crossing a temporary ice bridge because the timing happened to line up. Every single one of these separate strategies — walking, coastal foraging, open ocean rafting, ice bridge crossing — got combined, generation after generation, until every habitable continent on Earth had people on it. No planning committee, no master map, just persistent, adaptable humans repeatedly deciding that whatever was on the other side was worth the risk of finding out. If nobody taught you the actual scale of this journey in school, follow. We cover ancient history and human origins like this every single week. Comment which leg of this journey you think was the craziest, because honestly, I still can't get over the boat thing. And if you want more of this same wait, ancient humans were built different energy, check out the video on what ancient humans actually did all day, linked right here. Completely different topic, same kind of deep dive.